Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. This is a pivotal time for our nation and for our city. Each week, from now until November 4th, we'll address the issues and the concerns of New Yorkers and of Americans, and the ways in which the nominees for president and vice president address them and each other. We'll try to assess this extraordinary period with news and government observers and the newsmakers themselves. We've turned to a distinguished analyst of the political process, Dr. Ruth O'Brien. She is chair and executive officer of the City University Graduate Center Master's and PhD programs in political science, and editor of Telling Stories Out of Court, Narratives About Women and Workplace Discrimination, published by ILR Press. Who better to parse this extraordinary campaign and election? Welcome.
Thank you, Sheryl.
Aside from the obvious, we've got a black presidential candidate who won over a former first lady, and we've got a very conservative Republican candidate who has picked a female running mate for vice president. Has there been anything like this campaign ever before?
No, not at all. I mean, it really is the identity politics campaign. It is truly remarkable. And this last move, in which McCain chose Palin, that is also very remarkable. I think remarkable in a little bit of a distressing way, I might add, though. And a lot of women, the idea that Sarah Palin would attract Hillary Clinton supporters because of her identity, being a woman, but she stands for so many things that Hillary Clinton would be against, I think is quite cynical, to be honest. So
is there
in that
any
sense,
evidence that's working? That's happening?
No, there is evidence now that it's not necessarily going to work. But there's some evidence. I mean, it depends on the polls. And I'm not a real big fan of polls because polls also seem to get people to think a little bit like the polls.
Right.
So many people want to think in line with the majority. But so there's some evidence. I mean, it was working last week. This week it seems like it's not working so much. But I'm concerned more so that it's the elite press. It's the New York Times, it's the New Republic that really is writing these scathing reports on what actually she has done. But the idea that we started out back, when the campaign first started, and it did become a historic campaign in which we had an African American running against a woman, and now we have, a very cynical Republican ticket in which they're running a woman who does not in any way embody issues that pertain to women, that protect women, or that protect children, is really quite cynical. So to some extent, it's reminiscent then, to me, of Clarence Thomas' appointment, and I find that distressing.
How are your students reacting to the campaign? What are they saying about it?
Well, the students, most students are very excited about the idea that it was going to be an African American or woman for the Democratic ticket. But I have to say I'm on leave this semester, so I haven't had too much interaction with students this semester.
In general, because you've been teaching for a while, but do you see a lot of students who are expressing interest in going into politics or government service these days, or is it mostly focused on academia?
Absolutely. No, students have really changed. I think it was, but the marker in which I see, and I can see there are a number of different pieces of evidence that show that it's changed. For instance, Oxford University Press now has two editors about books on politics. There are more books published on politics, I think, than there have been in a very long time. But this really all started with 2001. I think it was a combination, first of 9/11, that got people very concerned about international affairs. And then secondly, by 2003, it was a concern with the Bush administration. So at least in the City University of New York, I see students are very interested in politics, have become more interested than when I first began teaching in the 1990s.
Interesting. Are they actually, do any of them work in political campaigns? Do you have that kind of direct political activity?
Absolutely. We have some, in the PhD program, we have graduate students. I had one student who was working as a speechwriter for somebody in Tennessee. And so students are very involved in politics and consider it passionately. And so they're there because they want to study to receive a PhD, and a PhD does generally mean you'll teach. But on the other hand, they're very involved in trying to get the word out. And for that reason, our program emphasizes real-world politics, and we created something in which we believe that academics are good at writing about politics, so we created this program called Writing Politics. And the idea is that our students will be interested in conveying their knowledge, which most people would see as in an ivory tower, in something a little bit more accessible. And so we asked them to write for academics and to publish monographs. At the same time, we also asked them to write for journalism or for educated lay people, like in the New York Review of Books or different places like that. This is the model.
Op-ed pieces, right.
Op-ed pieces, precisely. Because we think that academics have a role in the political process, and that role should be precisely that, trying to convey information that will change people's opinions about the political process.
There's a lot of controversy about what role celebrity endorsements, what impact they have on campaigns. You had Oprah, you had Ted Kennedy. I can't think of any big celebrities who came out for the Republicans, but that doesn't mean that they didn't. What impact do they have?
Well, I think I just read recently, and I'm not quite sure which source it was, that Oprah's conveying her support for Obama, which she'd never supported a candidate before, so we thought it was going to have a very big impact. Actually had a negative impact on her ratings.
Really?
That's what I just read. I think it must have been in the Times, maybe one of the magazines, but that was very interesting, I thought. Ted Kennedy, it's interesting you call him a celebrity. That's a totally different kettle of fish. I think that had a tremendous impact, particularly the way he came out. The impact there, I think, though, was not so much that he was a celebrity. He's clearly known. It was just showing us, I think, that the old-fashioned Democratic Party really did want to split from the Clintons, and showing absolute support and faith in Obama. And the idea, I think, that Obama, because you can look at Obama and see another JFK. So I think he was envisioning that, and when he did that, it had a tremendous impact. And then when his niece did that, Caroline Kennedy, it had an even greater impact. So that really was persuasive. Whereas Oprah, I thought it was going to be tremendously persuasive when I first heard she was going to do it, particularly since she'd held back, unlike so many other celebrities, and it wasn't as influential, or maybe it backfired even. I
did an informal survey at the beauty shop after she came out with that endorsement, and it seemed like, and there were a number of people who were saying, well, you know, Oprah can't tell me I'm not going to vote for any support somebody just because Oprah told me to. But I suspect that it made people, especially blacks, who had been doubted whether Obama could win, you know, think about him, give him a second thought. You know, because I think the great majority of African-American voters were supporting Hillary at first because they thought she was, you know, they liked the Clintons, she was a Democrat, they thought she could win, and that Oprah's coming out for him perhaps made them, you know, take a second look and think, well, maybe, you know, maybe this guy can win, and to consider him seriously as a candidate, is my sense. There have been so many scandals and brouhahas in this campaign, from, you know, the Reverend Wright's rantings to Jesse Jackson's on-air muttering to Bristol Palin's daughter's pregnancy to Michelle Obama's fist bump to Barack Obama's lipstick-wearing pig. How long a shelf life do these controversies have, and do they affect how people vote in the end, do you think?
Absolutely, they affect how people vote. And this is, it's just really, I mean, you can never really know, and the pundits can't know this, and the campaign strategists can't know this, exactly how something's going to affect something. So let's take, you know, this scandal of last week, the lipstick on a pig. So in hindsight, before I heard the entire context of what Obama had just said this, I thought, ooh, lipstick, that is a bad word to use. After we had all noticed, it was probably the highlight joke of Sarah Palin's speech, lipstick, you know, a hockey mom wearing lipstick.
Right.
So how did he come up with that word twice? So that gives it just occurred to me, but even just that occurrence means that I'm somewhat skeptical now and have to go listen to Obama in context. It was taken utterly and completely out of context, but the press, as you know, does feel that it has to report not just things that are successful, but also accidents. So you could say the reporting was almost that it was so out of context, but in saying that it was so out of context, that he had not in any way said anything prejudicial against women, that it really was just, I guess, you might call it a Freudian slip, using lipstick twice, that was giving it more play. And then there are some strategists that would even say that the people behind the scenes realize that maybe they don't have the money to run the ads, so they want the journalists to be able to talk about the ad that ran 10 times.
Right,
so this seems to be in the same context, and if that's so, I mean, that is so, it seems, then of course that is going to affect how people perceive him. They're not going to look for the context.
Right. Did you sense a different tone between the two conventions? And if so, what did they say about the country, the parties, the election?
Well, there was a different tone. There was a different color scheme. That's always interesting. That
Really?
The Democrats are always blue.
Okay.
And the Republicans are always red.
Oh, okay. Well, wonder why.
But so obviously Katrina it did seem to be that somebody else was. It did seem an odd coincidence that they wouldn't. That the Republicans. Finally, it must have occurred to them not to hold the convention maybe at that time that we seem to have a lot of hurricanes because they so did not come to the rescue then of New Orleans and Mississippi with Katrina. So that was so they did step back and they made it more of a morose situation or there was a funeral aspect to it, and that seemed very tasteful. At the same time, once they got through that, they seemed to be, well, Sarah Palin definitely hit a high note. So I have to say I was watching to see if my town in Metuchen, New Jersey is 13,000, and I know our mayor, and our mayor will call me up if I even make a complaint of any order. So I know the size of town that we're talking about when we're talking about Sarah Palin. And the idea that she would go from a 10,000 person town to, governor of a very small state to the vice president of a rather old Republican candidate seems to me quite breathless. So, and the lack of experience there takes me by surprise. So, but on the other hand, she was clearly a woman with great poise, and she was handled very well, and she did a very good job. So the moment she began to speak, they ended on a high note, and they seemed to get a much bigger bump than we see that the Obama campaign got.
One thing I noticed at the Democratic convention, at least until Hillary Clinton spoke, the excitement level in the hall seemed to be subdued. And maybe I'm just talking about the level of the applause. And I said, I bet that when the Republicans have their convention, they're going to ramp up the amplification system so you can hear, this cheer. And they did. They did.
Yes.
It was much louder.
They did. On the other hand, the Democrats really, on one hand, it was a great move, and I think on paper it was a great move. They wanted this large stadium. More people were there than ever before. But the fact that they didn't have a ceiling had a tremendous effect, and so you felt that, and they couldn't have the balloons come down from the ceiling. So I really think it was just they chose the wrong room kind of a problem. I don't think there really was any sense, because all the people on the floor were saying that there was this tremendous sense of excitement. It wasn't conveyed on air, and that's always a concern. It's one thing to be there, and it's another thing for us to be watching, and most of us are watching.
Were cool, though.
Yeah, they were cool.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back right after this message.
This is my family. That's my mom and dad. And my brother. And that's me, future Hall of Famer. That's Grandpa. He's my best friend. Grandpa's got diabetes, but he's got it under control.
I keep my blood sugar close to normal. That means I watch what I eat and walk every day. I always take my medicine and test my blood sugar because I want to be around to see the next Jackie Robinson.
Control your diabetes for life. Call 1-800-438-5383.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Professor Ruth O'Brien, Chair and Executive Officer of the City University's Graduate Center's Master's and PhD Political Science programs. That's a real mouthful.
It is.
I often hear people say, Democrats obviously, how can anybody be a Republican? And I usually reply that I think Democrats and Republicans are just fundamentally different kinds of people, and also different kinds of people that really don't like each other very much. Do you think that's true?
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I look at the past 10 years, and what I see is that I think it's almost an emotional position, how you feel about the American dream. Most Americans believe in equality and they believe in freedom, and we have to balance the two out. A Republican, I think, believes that they really do have the right to be free, i.e. pursue whatever they want to pursue, and whatever they gain in that pursuit, that should not be taken away. At the same time, I think they deny, the fact that their parents probably helped them out quite a lot. So most Republicans, and most of us are what our parents were, 98 or 99% of us are. On the other hand, Democrats seem to want to say that we should have equality of opportunity. They are from a different socioeconomic status or highly educated, because highly educated people realize, I think, to some extent that everybody doesn't have the same advantages. And so they're not just looking at their own personal gain, you might say, as a Republican, though my bias is coming out here. But on the other hand, the Democrats then believe more in sharing, and they believe people should have more of a chance. And this is an emotional response and kind of a different worldview. So in that sense, we have the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats, where they're faulted, you might say, is that they look at society has problems and the individual is not taking as much responsibility, and that's what the Republicans can criticize the Democrats for. And of course, the Democrats can criticize the Republicans for saying that they just believe too much in greed and personal gain.
And of course, you know, the Republicans like freedom, but they're not opposed to some government support if it's going to help them.
That's right. We have a
money.
We have a lot of support in this country on both sides that both parties support. For instance, I don't think you could say there would be a Republican that would be against the mortgage, you know, that we can take our interest off our mortgage. And this is a middle class and upper middle class tax relief. At the same time, they would criticize people for taking welfare or getting rid of welfare.
Right.
The Democrats, on the other hand, when I say they're more for equal opportunity, they really have fallen down on the job the past 20 years. We see that, you know, students, I mean, this is what Obama is trying to address. We see not just with healthcare, but also with education. So we are becoming a nation very quickly where both sides, some Republicans, and if you saw that piece in the New York Times magazine just a week ago with David Frum, a former Republican, he was saying that the economic inequality in this country has increased so it's gotten to be out of control. It's gotten to be a problem that even the Republicans see. And that's because while the Democrats were concerned about fiscal responsibility and the Republicans were concerned about tax cuts for the wealthy and for the upper middle class, nobody's really been concerned about redistribution and redistributive politics, and this is what I see Obama is. So in that sense, I think that the Obama election is a historic election, not so much for race, but if he is elected, there's a possibility that he might create a very new agenda that's based upon individual freedom and equality. At the same time, he believes in redistribution of income so that we have more equality. But this is something that's there in all of his policies, but something that I think he's a little bit afraid to make too loud.
Right.
Because if he does, we'll say, okay, here we have the radical black man.
Yeah, I heard
running for
somebody,
president.
I guess it was a pundit pointing that out, you know, that Obama's, I think he's really about redistribution and, you know, boogaboo, bugaboo, bugaboo, that's a terrible thing, a communistic kind of thing. What do you think New Yorkers want to hear from the candidates?
Well, I think that New Yorkers want to hear from, I mean, as we all know, New Yorkers are not very inclined toward the Republicans, or if they are, maybe Rudy Giuliani. And that, I think we should take a moment, too, as New Yorkers, and be collectively offended by what he said during the convention speech. I don't know if you remember, but he said that he's not so much for cosmopolitanism, which is, you know, a code for diversity, which is a code a long time ago simply for, Stalin used to refer to cosmopolitanism because it was code for anti-Semitism. So here we had somebody who started out as a Democrat, became a Republican for mayoral elections, and then is a Republican nominee, or tries to be a Republican nominee, and he's speaking at the convention, and he's a New Yorker, and he's talking against diversity. So I think as New Yorkers, we should all be outraged by that comment, and I didn't see much in the press about that. On the other hand, as New Yorkers, I think we would like to see health care. We would like to see a policy in which you weren't told to go to an emergency room, even if you have insurance, you know, like I was for my foot when I broke it just recently. We would like to see a system where my students would get greater funding. You know, over the years, since the 60s and 70s, definitely just since the 70s, students have been receiving less and less and less money through Pell Grants when you take into account inflation. So I think New Yorkers would like to see more parity in terms of having our students be able to attend higher education. And tax. I think the tax policy should be changed. And I think if Obama does it through an existing policy, there's a very good chance he's using a more universal language in which he won't be accused of being communist or socialist, because our tax policy in the United States is very regressive, not progressive, even though we all don't like paying taxes.
I think many Americans, and I mean, they say that they are unhappy with the state of the country. I mean, whether it's the fact that we're still bogged down in the war, the horrendous state of the economy, or the loss of American prestige abroad, or, you know, the cost of gasoline, or the sorry state of the dollar. And yet, after 8 years of Republican administration, the presidential candidates are neck and neck, and McCain may even be out ahead of Obama. What do you think is going on?
I think it's really quite surprising, and I heard David Brooks on Friday just speaking about this, and he was saying this would be the first time ever in which we would have an election in which everything again is for the Democrats to win, as it was also to some extent in 2004. Most Americans want to be out of the war. This is Obama's position. It's not McCain's position. Most Americans want some kind of reform in health care. This is, Obama's position. It's not McCain's position. Most people understand the economy is in dire straits. This doesn't seem to concern McCain because he wants to carry on with 4 more years of what we would call the Bush administration, and Obama doesn't. The economy is in trouble. Every day we wake up and another large firm, financial, Wall Street, whatever, is going under. So things are quite frightening. So the idea that you have the large things that everybody is so concerned about that are all in the favor of the Democratic candidate, and a Republican would come in and win, would be historic in the sense that it would have been the campaign that caused him to win as opposed to the issues. And since McCain was not doing well, just several months ago before the conventions, and it did look like Obama had a very good chance at winning this election, it seems very much tied to the one issue of identity politics, which was this issue of what Sarah Palin will bring. So I think, though, once the country gets used to Sarah Palin and really understands what her administration was doing in Alaska and her style of governing, it does seem to me hard to believe that would carry McCain over the line here. After
having a really good convention, and I think both parties did, but then almost the day after, when I was listening to Barack Obama in his town hall things and Joe Biden being interviewed on television, the air seemed to have gone out. I mean, suddenly, I don't know, the energy just didn't seem to be there.
Of the Democrats, you mean?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, did you notice that as well? And if so, what do you think is going on? What do you think they need to do?
I definitely noticed it, because this is kind of a no-win situation where, I mean, you could say now in hindsight, some people are saying this, Obama should have picked Hillary, Obama should have picked a woman. I was disappointed myself when he chose Biden. I think Biden would be a superb vice president, but I don't quite understand what he brought to the campaign in terms of winning the election. So this I did not understand. So now the choice seems all the more glaring because they've got a presidential candidate, the Republicans do, that they can card out and is bringing something to the campaign, a level of excitement that the Democrats don't have. I don't understand what's happening with the Obama campaign. They do need a fresh start. It's absolutely critical at this stage. They need to come out fighting. It
sounds like they're just being a little too gentlemanly.
That's right, yeah. But it's tough. I mean, and Biden's an attack dog, and when he debates Sarah Palin, she's also, I guess, an attack dog of different sorts. But what's going to happen then? So is this feminism in a very peculiar way kind of being thrown back in our face in a way that's very negative? Or I guess I wouldn't call it feminism, I would call it identity politics. You have a woman who takes positions that men would support, positions that Republicans would support, positions that really are anti-female, anti-child, and she's out there leading the way. And but she gets all the graciousness of how men should treat a woman, so that they don't want to be perceived as attacking this woman, and then so that's very problematic. So I'm not quite sure. They are in a bind what exactly they should do.
What has pleased you most about this campaign, and what has disappointed you the most or displeased you the most?
Well, what's pleased me the most is really that we do have an African American running for president, and that there is a good chance that he'll succeed. And at the same time, what has disappointed me the most was, I think, when we first, before the Democratic Convention, we started to see these figures which said that racism is actually a visceral condition. People have a yes or no gut reaction, and that they actually vote that way. So I have to say, I've been holding my breath, particularly before the Palin thing happened, or before she was nominated, to see what would happen. Are we a country that has grown up and we can't accept an African American president? Are we a country that's grown up and could accept a woman, president? And then I would be delighted. But of course, I'm not sure.
If the Democrats win, do you think do you see a role for Hillary Clinton in the cabinet or in the government?
I really don't. I think Hillary has a role in the Senate, and I'm not sure if I was Obama, I would bring Hillary in, because she seems to have her own agenda. She's a very strong person, and she's a different faction of the party, even if they're not that far apart in terms of public policy. So if I was him, I would appoint a lot of women, and I certainly hope he will and think he should, but it would be other talented women that are out there.
And you think it was a correct decision not to have her as his running mate, or do you?
Absolutely. It was a correct decision. You don't bring somebody in who's your competitor. And I don't think it's just not done in the way that they were in such great competition, and then Bill Clinton is always going to be a factor, and as we know, he's not gotten over it yet.
Right.
So it seems to me not a smart move to make somebody your running mate who might potentially stab you in the back at any moment.
We're out of time. I want to thank Dr. Ruth O'Brien for joining me. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.